So have you ever had a boss or, maybe watched a politician who just seemed to play by a completely different set of moral rules?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Right.
we all have, right?
Right. And usually when we talk about leadership, we expect this sort of clean, engineering-like precision. You tell the truth, you treat people well, and the result is supposed to be a healthy workplace or a stable country.
Yeah, we really crave that binary system. Good actions equal good outcomes. We want the mechanics of leadership to just be visible and neatly categorized into right and wrong.
But then you step into the real world of power dynamics, and that moral compass just starts spinning wildly. You find yourself in this landscape that is incredibly murky.
It is. It's totally opaque sometimes.
Exactly. So today we are exploring the ultimate playbook for navigating that exact murkiness. We are doing a deep dive into a massive stack of historical texts, translations, and modern political analyses to unpack one of the most infamous books in human history.
We're talking about Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince.
Yes, the prince.
And, for centuries, just the word Machiavellian has functioned as this cultural shorthand for, like, evil, manipulative, and ruthless behavior.
It's basically a cartoon villain trope at this point.
Totally. It just means the bad guy in the movie.
But the mission of this deep dive is to look past that modern adjective. We're going to discover the actual, incredibly pragmatic and often completely misunderstood philosophy of the man himself.
Which is so much more fascinating than the cartoon version.
I mean, we're exploring why he wrote it, what he actually meant by power, and how his ideas shaped everything from modern authoritarianism to the United States Constitution.
Yeah, that last part always surprises people.
It really does. But before we can even begin to judge the ruthless advice in The Prince, we have to understand the desperate, chaotic world that forced Machiavelli to put pen to paper.
Because context is really the only way to decode this book. You have to picture 16th century Italy. It is not a unified country with a central government. It's this fragile, chaotic collection of independent city-states. Florence, Venice, Milan, the Papal States, Naples.
And they are just locked in this endless cycle of shifting alliances, constantly at each other's throats.
Exactly. And the trauma that completely shatters Machiavelli's generation happens in 1494.
When the French invade.
Yes, King Charles VIII of France invades Italy with a massive modernized army.
And the Italian city-states are totally unprepared for that scale of violence, right? I mean, Florence, which is Machiavelli's home, is remarkably weak.
They're incredibly vulnerable.
They don't even have a standing army of their own citizens. They rely entirely on these unreliable mercenary armies.
Right, soldiers for hire.
Yeah, who have a terrible habit of just melting away when the fighting actually gets dangerous.
Because they just want to get paid. They don't want to die for a city they don't care about.
Yeah.
So into this absolute mess steps a young Niccolò Machiavelli. He becomes a top diplomat for the Florentine Republic. And for 14 years, he's the man in the room with kings, popes, warlords.
He's right in the thick of it.
He is Florence's eyes and ears, just training to keep his vulnerable city-state alive through these endless, desperate negotiations.
And from the sources, by all accounts, he is a scrupulously honest civil servant.
He really was.
He's practically living out of a suitcase, constantly begging his government to just, reimburse his travel expenses.
Yeah, he's definitely not getting rich off this job. But then the floor just falls out from under him.
This is in 1512, right?
Exactly. In 1512, the incredibly powerful Medici family, backed by a foreign army, storms back into Florence to take over. The Republic collapses.
Oh.
Machiavelli is stripped of his position, and the situation escalates rapidly. He is suspected of conspiring against the new Medici government.
Just because he was part of the old government?
Right. So this loyal, underpaid civil servant is thrown into a dark cell and brutally tortured.
He experiences the absolute extreme of political whiplash. He goes from being the center of global negotiations to literally hanging from his wrists in a dungeon.
It's horrific. They eventually find him innocent and release him, but he is banished to a small, dusty farm out in the countryside.
So at 44 years old, his career is in ashes, his beloved city is bleeding under foreign occupation, and he is entirely powerless.
Completely sidelined.
There is this incredible image in a letter he writes to a friend in 1513 describing this new life in exile.
Oh, the farm letter. It's iconic.
Right, he says that by day he is out on his farm, arguing with local woodcutters, playing cards at a rundown inn, literally covered in mud and slime.
But when the sun goes down,
He undergoes this powerful psychological transformation.
yeah, he writes that he strips off his mud-caked everyday clothes and he puts on his formal palace gowns.
Dressed once again in the robes of a diplomat.
Exactly. And he steps into his study, opens his books, and converses with the ancient historians. He says that for 4 hours a day, he feels no pain.
He forgets his poverty, and he is no longer afraid of death.
He feeds on the only food that is truly his. And it is in that specific study, operating that defiant mindset, that he writes The Prince.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Wait, so he writes The Ultimate Dictator's Handbook, a book basically saying the end justifies the means as a job application to the very people, the Medici, who just tortured him.
I know it sounds completely paradoxical on the surface, but to understand the underlying logic, you have to realize Machiavelli was rejecting the entire tradition of political philosophy that came before him.
He's throwing out the old rule book.
Entirely. He wasn't writing an idealistic utopia like Plato's Republic, describing how a state ought to be.
Right.
Machiavelli looked at the violence, the betrayals, and the foreign armies ravaging his homeland, and he decided to write about what he termed the effective truth of politics.
The effective truth. Not the world we wish we lived in, but the brutal mechanics of the world as it actually operates.
Exactly. He firmly believed that traditional Christian virtues, humility, charity, turning the other cheek, they were beautiful concepts in private life.
But terrible for politics.
Right. For a head of state, those same virtues were suicidal. If a leader insists on being universally good in a world heavily populated by people who are not good, that leader will be destroyed.
Their state will fall into ruin and their people will suffer.
And Machiavelli saw Italy bleeding out. He genuinely believed that a strong, ruthlessly effective leader was the only mechanism left to expel the foreign invaders and restore order.
So mere survival became the ultimate moral imperative. Anything else was just a luxury Florence couldn't afford.
That's it, exactly.
Because his goal was sheer survival in an active war zone, he had to completely redefine the definition of a good leader. And I think this requires us to look at his two most crucial and frankly most heavily mistranslated concepts.
Fortuna and virtù.
Yes. Let's start with Fortuna.
So these concepts are the twin engines driving his entire philosophy. Fortuna is generally translated as fortune or luck. But Machiavelli didn't view Fortuna as some benign goddess handing out lottery winnings.
Right. It's not good luck.
No, he saw it as a rigid, destructive force of sheer chaos. He famously compares Fortuna to a violent, flooding river that obliterates trees and levels buildings.
Just total devastation.
Yeah, and he says when the river is quiet, men must build dams and dikes so that when the flood inevitably arrives, the water is channeled and the destruction is minimized.
And as a product of his time, he uses a pretty jarring, frankly misogynistic metaphor to drive this point home.
We do have to look at the text impartially to understand his historical worldview regarding power. Machiavelli reflects the deep-seated patriarchy of 16th century Italy by comparing Fortuna to a woman.
Right.
He argues that to keep her under control, a leader must beat and dominate her through bold, impetuous action. He claims she is more often conquered by aggressive, spirited young men than by cautious ones.
It's a violent image, but it perfectly illustrates his core belief, right? The universe is inherently hostile.
It does not reward passivity. It responds only to forceful intervention.
And the tool you use to intervene, the weapon you use to fight back against that chaotic flood, is virtue.
Yes, and this is the trap everyone falls into when reading him.
Because virtue does not mean moral virtue. He's not telling leaders to be honest or kind or chaste.
Far from it. For Machiavelli, virtue is raw capability. It is strategic skill, energetic willpower, intense flexibility, and above all, the willingness to be absolutely ruthless when the situation demands it.
It's the ability to read the terrain and adapt your tactics to the chaos of Fortuna.
Right. A leader possessing virtue doesn't sit around hoping for good luck. They manufacture their own outcomes through calculated action.
And to see this theoretical concept in flesh and blood, we have to look at Machiavelli's ultimate case study, right? Cesare Borgia.
Oh yeah, Borgia is a perfect example. Machiavelli actually spent time with Borgia during his diplomatic missions.
So he saw him in action.
He did. Borgia was a warlord, the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI, and he was aggressively carving out a massive territory in the Romagna region of Italy.
And when Borgia first took over the Romagna, it was a lawless, violent nightmare populated by warring factions.
Complete chaos. Borgia knew he needed to establish order, but he also understood that the necessary crackdown would be brutal and make him deeply hated by the locals.
So he outsources the cruelty.
Yes.
He appoints a minister, a man named Ramiro de Orco, who has a reputation for being terrifyingly efficient and completely merciless.
Borgia essentially hands him absolute power and tells him to pacify the region.
And de Orco does exactly that, utilizing mass arrests, swift executions, and absolute terror to force the warring factions into submission.
And here is where Borgia demonstrates what Machiavelli considered pure virtue.
Right, because the region is finally peaceful, but Borgia knows the population is deeply traumatized.
And that hatred is quietly brewing against his government because of de Orco's extreme methods.
So Borgia decides it is time to permanently distance himself from the very violence he orchestrated.
Right. One morning, the people of the town of Cesena wake up to find Raniero de Orco chopped in half in the public square.
Wow!
Just lying there, with a bloody knife and a wooden block left right next to him.
Wait, he has his own guy chopped in half? The guy who just successfully did exactly what he was hired to do?
Yep.
That is staggering. And Machiavelli writes that the townspeople were gratified and shocked.
It's brilliant in a dark way. Borgia manages to completely pacify a lawless region, publicly eliminates the one guy who can take the blame for all the cruelty, and miraculously keeps his own hands looking perfectly clean.
What's fascinating here is how violently this separates Machiavelli from other prominent thinkers of the Renaissance, like Erasmus or Martin Luther.
Yeah, because they argued that a ruler answered to a higher divine moral standard. A king was supposed to be a living mirror of God's justice.
But Machiavelli completely severs politics from theology.
Totally. The highest moral duty of a leader is simply protecting the stability of the state.
Right, Borgia's actions were grotesque, without question, but they stopped a chaotic civil war.
To Machiavelli, ending the bloodshed through calculated cruelty is the essence of true virtue.
So virtue is essentially like being a surfer. You cannot control the massive, chaotic wave of fortuna crashing down on you, whether that's, an economic collapse, a pandemic, or a foreign invasion.
I like that analogy.
Right. Your virtue is your balance on the board. It's your ruthlessness, your flexibility, and your adaptability to shift your weight and ride that wave without drowning.
Because the wave doesn't care about your morals. It only cares about your balance. Borgia maintained his balance by shifting the weight of public hatred onto someone else.
Which brings us to the next big point. Borgia's success with his cruel minister proves a terrifying point. Fear gets results.
It definitely does.
But a ruler can't chop someone in half every single day. How does a leader maintain that control in the mundane, day-to-day management of an office or a state?
Well, this raises that famous question. What is the actual mechanism of fear versus the mechanism of love?
Right. Is it better to be feared or loved?
Machiavelli addresses this directly. He says that in a perfect world, a leader should want to be both loved and feared.
But human nature makes combining those two things almost impossible.
Right. So if a leader is forced to choose, Machiavelli argues it is mathematically much safer to rely on fear.
And he bases that on a remarkably dark assessment of human nature. He describes people as ungrateful, fickle, liars, and hypocrites.
Yeah, he really doesn't think highly of us.
No, he says they are eager for profit and incredibly quick to run away the second danger appears.
His psychological insight zeroes in on the fragility of emotional bonds. He argues that love is merely a bond of obligation.
Right.
Because humans are inherently self-interested, they will snap that bond of love the very second a better opportunity comes along, or the moment loyalty becomes dangerous.
So if you rely solely on your people loving you, you are standing on quicksand.
Exactly. The moment a severe crisis hits, they will abandon you to save themselves.
But fear is a completely different mechanism.
Fear is maintained by a dread of punishment that never fades. You cannot control whether someone feels love for you. That internal emotion is entirely up to them.
True.
But you absolutely can control whether they fear the consequences of crossing you. A rational leader bases their power on the variables they can control, not on the fickle emotions of others.
Now, there is a massive caveat to this rule that often gets ignored.
Yes, the hatred caveat.
He insists you must be feared, but you must never be hated. Hatred is the absolute death of a leader.
And he provides incredibly specific instructions on how to strike that delicate balance.
Right. How do you inspire fear without tipping over into hatred?
You inspire fear by holding people strictly accountable and dispensing harsh, swift justice when a rule is broken.
But you avoid hatred by respecting boundaries.
Yes. His golden rule for avoiding hatred is simple. Do not touch your subjects' property and do not touch their women.
He drops that incredibly cynical observation: men are quicker to forget the death of a father than the loss of an inheritance.
It is a brutal assessment. But he's pointing at a psychological reality about stability.
Right.
As long as people feel secure in their private lives and their bank accounts, they will tolerate and even respect a fearsome leader.
But the moment a leader arbitrarily takes what belongs to the people, fear curdles into hatred. And hatred is what fuels conspiracies and armed rebellion.
Which explains his counterintuitive warning against being overly generous.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we naturally want our leaders to be generous.
Oh, we do.
But Machiavelli outlines how generosity is a trap. If you throw money around to buy the love of the public, eventually the treasury runs dry.
And then to maintain the illusion of wealth, you have to raise taxes.
Suddenly, you are taking money directly from the people, and they will hate you for it. It is structurally better to be seen as stingy from the very beginning.
Think about the modern dynamics in your own workplace.
Oh, this is a great comparison.
The managers who rely solely on being liked often freeze when a crisis hits. They can't make the hard choices, they won't fire underperformers, and the whole team ultimately suffers.
Whereas leaders who establish clear boundaries, who are respected and perhaps a little feared because there are actual consequences for failure, they tend to survive and keep the organization functioning.
Exactly. Machiavelli isn't advocating for cartoonish evil, he's advocating for psychological realism.
You have to manage people based on how they actually behave, not how you wish they would behave.
Right.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Moving from 16th century Florence to the modern era, Machiavelli's specific instructions on manipulating public perception haven't aged a single day.
Not at all.
He lays out the exact mechanics of the modern populist playbook.
He really does. He understood that a leader doesn't actually need to possess traditional moral qualities like mercy, honesty, or deep religious faith.
But they absolutely must appear to possess them.
He famously writes that a leader must be a great pretender and dissembler. The illusion of virtue is far more powerful than the reality of it.
And political analysts continuously point out how these exact ideas echo in modern populist and authoritarian movements across the entire political spectrum.
Oh, everywhere.
Whether you're looking at Benito Mussolini or Donald Trump, the core mechanics of Machiavellian statecraft are operating in plain sight. And to be clear, we are looking at this purely analytically.
Right, we aren't taking sides, we're just examining the raw mechanics of power as described in the sources.
Right, and Machiavelli argued that a prince must always align with the people against the nobility or the elites.
And that alignment is the defining characteristic of modern populism.
The idea of the pure people battling a corrupt aristocracy.
Exactly. Machiavelli realized something that subverts our standard assumptions about tyranny. We tend to think dictators just oppress the masses with brute force.
But Machiavelli understood that the masses are far too numerous to fight directly.
Right. True. Sustainable power comes from weaponizing the resentment of the common people against the elite class.
So what is the actual psychology behind weaponizing that resentment? Why does that optical illusion work so perfectly?
Because everyday people generally just want to avoid being oppressed. The elites, however, actively want to dominate and oppress.
So if a leader steps up to a microphone and says, "I am your shield against these corrupt insiders who are stealing your future," the people feel a deep emotional validation.
The leader becomes a symbol of their own frustration. If the people believe you are their champion, they will forgive almost any transgression, any scandal, or any lie.
It's a profound observation about human perception. He says everyone sees what you appear to be. Very few people actually experience what you really are.
And the masses are easily swayed by appearances and by the final outcome of events.
If a leader projects strength and delivers a sense of security, the people won't care about the backroom deals, the hypocrisy, or the ruthless tactics used to achieve that security.
They see the ends and they automatically justify the means.
Modern political optics. The curated photo ops, the carefully crafted speeches, the projection of an image completely divorced from a politician's private reality, that is entirely Machiavellian.
The leader who masters the art of appearing virtuous while acting ruthlessly is the one who survives the longest.
Which is a harsh reality, but it brings us to a massive plot twist in Machiavelli's legacy.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
It's incredibly easy to see his fingerprints on dictators and authoritarians, but his darkest assumptions about human nature actually built the foundation of modern democracy.
Yeah, this is the side of Machiavelli that rarely makes it into pop culture.
Right.
Alongside The Prince, which functions as a crisis manual for a single ruler, he wrote a much longer, deeply philosophical work called Discourses on Livy.
And that book is a passionate, detailed defense of Republican government and civic virtue.
Exactly.
Wait, the same guy who said, hire a cruel minister, chop him in half, and lie to the public wrote a defense of republics? How do those two things exist in the same brain?
Because his core assumption about human nature never changed.
Which is that human beings are inherently self-interested, ambitious, and
Yeah.
deeply flawed.
Right. In a monarchy or a dictatorship, you are relying on the impossible hope that the single ruler just happens to be a good, uncorrupted person.
Which is a terrible bet.
A terrible bet.
Right.
But in a republic, Machiavelli argued, you don't need leaders to be good. You take that undeniable human selfishness and you design a structural system that forces competing interests to check and balance each other.
You pit ambition against ambition.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. That's James Madison.
Exactly.
That's straight out of the Federalist Papers, laying out the architectural design of the United States Constitution.
The American founding fathers deeply studied Machiavelli. They read the discourses, they understood his pragmatic realism.
They recognized that mere idealism, hoping that elected officials would simply do the right thing, was entirely insufficient to build a lasting country.
You have to anticipate human flaws.
So you separate the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches so that the selfish desires of one group are permanently blocked by the selfish desires of another.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely changes how we view him.
Yeah, Machiavelli wasn't teaching leaders to be evil. He was teaching sheer realism.
He was saying, look, this is the raw material of humanity. It is greedy, it is fearful, and it is easily manipulated.
And by accepting that reality, rather than wishing for a utopia that doesn't exist, you can design a government that actually survives our worst instincts.
Even George Washington stepping down after 2 terms was an act of Republican virtue, consciously resisting the consolidation of power.
That is a lesson directly informed by Machiavelli's warnings about the fragility of republics.
It's all connected.
It is an unbelievable journey. We started with a mud-covered, tortured diplomat in 16th century Italy, writing in the dead of night to save his bleeding country.
Yeah.
We unpacked how he redefined virtue into virtue, the pure ruthlessness and flexibility required to ride the chaotic wave of fortuna.
We explored the psychological mechanics of why he believed it was safer to be feared than loved.
Right, and how mastering the art of appearances is the true key to modern power.
And finally, we realized that the cynical, dark rules of the prince actually birthed the checks and balances that keep modern democracy functioning today.
He stripped all the comforting illusions away from politics, and in doing so, he gave us the actual tools to survive it.
It's a profound legacy.
It really is. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. Machiavelli said that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are.
That's so true.
In today's hyper-curated, social media-driven world, are we all just practicing our own personal version of Machiavellian statecraft every single day?
Why?
Is that carefully polished online persona you maintain just the prince you project to survive the chaos of modern life? Think about the mask you wear tomorrow and ask yourself, who is really in control of the state? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the prince. See you next time.